And we are live. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Down the Middle. This is a very, very special episode. We are joined tonight by none other than RD Reynolds, the author of The Death of WCW.
Yes.
Yep,
Also,
that is me. Brian Alvarez and I wrote that book, and we've gotten a lot of static over the years about it.
It's made you Eric Bischoff's favorite person.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, Eric's never actually read the book, so it's we had a good laugh about that once upon a time. Whenever we had debated the book, and then we got backstage, and I was like, Eric, just tell me the truth. You've never read this book, have you? And he's just like, no, and I never will. And we both started laughing and shook hands and thought it was hilarious. So
there were quite a few douchebags thrown out in that panel.
Yeah, there were some thrown out whenever he saw me in Vegas, 6 months later or whatever it was as well. So,
yeah, I can imagine. But while we're on the subject, Ben is our resident WCW mark, so he's probably going to have a lot more questions than I do, because we were talking before we went live. I kind of didn't really fall in love with wrestling until about 2006, so I know of WCW, but I wasn't live and in person to see it. So, but I know basically what happened. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
No, I apologize. No, I'm sorry. No, I grew up with WCW. I started watching WCW around 1990, NWA, WCW around 1990 when I was about 2 years old, and I've liked it ever since. Like, my first interaction with wrestling was, like I said, was that. And well, coincidentally enough, like, everybody knew who Hulk Hogan was, especially from WWF and all that stuff. I didn't know who Hulk Hogan was until he came to WCW, which is weird. And I tell my friends that, like, how did you not know who Hulk Hogan was? I'm like, we never watched WWF in my house. Never. We always watched WCW. So like, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you said you started watching WCW like 1990, 91?
Yes.
Wow, those were generally considered the dark days of WCW as well. So
yes, they were the dark days of WCW, but like I said, my grandfather was a big wrestling fan, and my uncle was too, and that's what they watched was WCW. They watched the National Wrestling Alliance first, and then the transition over into WCW. So that's what I watched when I was a kid. But like, I didn't know who WWF was until, like, I think I said this to Jake or whatnot. My grandmother or somebody, my grandmother used to go to yard sales all the time. It's my first ever WWF tapes that I ever got were WrestleManias 3, 4, and 5, and SummerSlam '89. And that was my first introduction to the WWF. I'm like, okay. So there's these other characters and this other promotion that's out there as well. And I'm like, okay, well, why aren't these guys here and now and this and that? I'm trying to learn all this stuff and everything. It's like, I'm like, all right, there's too much. And then I know we're talking about WCW, but coincidentally enough, my great grandfather, he got me into ECW.
Okay.
Because he had the satellites had a special channel.
Yep.
Back in the day. For ECW, and he watched it, and he taped Hardcore Heaven. Oh, what was that one? I think it was 98. Taz was the ECW television champion, and that was my first introduction to ECW as well. So I'm like, okay, so now I know I've got all my understandings of WCW, now WWF, now ECW. Now it's like all this conglomerate of wrestling that I'm trying to, like, learn about. And now here I am in the wrestling business. I know all about the wrestling business per se, especially with AEW and TNA and Mexico. It's like, oh my God, there's too much.
Yeah, no, especially now, because now you got WWE, AEW, You've got AAA down in Mexico, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and those are the big guys. And then you've got the NWA coming back. So it's a pretty good time to be a wrestling fan, I think, especially if you're a CM Punk fan.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it's a great time to be a wrestling fan because it is something right now. The biggest problem, pre-AEW, and there's always been wrestling all over the world, and there's always been great wrestling all over the world, but it's been very tough sometimes to find that. It's not been the easiest thing to do. And what's been nice with AEW is now this whole realm has opened up. And, you mentioned CM Punk. I mean, we saw the reaction that he got, because as we're recording that was just a few days ago. And I mean, I was around, I had started following wrestling in the mid 80s. So I was around for a little bit of the rock and wrestling connection. I caught the tail end of the Cyndi Lauper stuff, but I was definitely around, starting about WrestleMania 2. And I was there before real Hulk Hogan, his big house show run, whenever, that first WWF title run. And I went there, to house shows, and I'll never forget one time I went to a show. I think it was the second time I saw Hogan live. And the crowd was so crazy cheering. I just closed my eyes and I said, RD, just savor this. You will remember this the rest of your life. And I did. I to this day, I mean, it was, however many years ago. I mean, you're talking 35 years ago or whatever. Just the incredible reaction. And I had never seen a reaction like that until I went to Double or Nothing out in Vegas for the Cody Dustin match. And I was just like, man, am I ever going to see anything like this again? And then you see what happened on Rampage the other night with CM Punk appearing, and it was just incredible. And I'm not even the world's biggest CM Punk fan, but I was absolutely just taken aback by, look at this reaction, look how happy. That's the thing. Whenever I go and I see wrestling, I want to be entertained. I want to be happy with what I see. And that was something you had grown men literally in tears. They were so happy. And I was like, this is really cool. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I've had a friend who's not really, they know about wrestling, but they're not into it. And he even asked me, he was like, so what's the deal with this? Like, I saw that there were guys crying and everybody was excited. I'm like, okay, but there's so many things that go into that. Because first of all, here's a guy who multiple times said he was never going to get back into a wrestling ring because he fell out of love with the business that he fell in love with. And then this kind of came to me a couple days after, and of course after rewatching it way too many times. But it kind of hit me that I think the main reason so many people were so emotional with Punk's return was because CM Punk represents, he's a guy who, in spite of when he made it big into the business in WWE, in the big leagues, there was really only WWE. And in spite of everything that system put against him, somehow, some way, he still managed to still be CM Punk. And then at the very end of it, he told them to fuck off. Right. He was done. He didn't want to do it anymore. And I think to hardcore wrestling fans who were tired of everything just being shoved down our throats by WWE, Vince McMahon, whoever you want to blame, it's nice to see Punk come back, and it kind of just solidifies that what AEW started and is now going even further with the inclusion of Punk is that there is an alternative, and not only is there an audience, most people are tired of WWE's business as usual, and they're going to have to change if they want to. Now, they're still number one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, but I think Punk could legitimately change that if they do this properly, and they'd really have to screw it up.
Even if not, I mean, it's just nice to have an alternative that you're not looking at and saying, okay, this alternative is either going to go bankrupt. This alternative is going to shoot itself in the foot. This alternative is going to get bought out by WWE. It's something where you can kind of say, I can put my fandom in this. I can put my time into this because it doesn't feel like it's going to go away. It's gaining momentum. It's a lot of, in a lot of ways, I would look at AEW. It was kind of what, in some ways, it was kind of what WCW was back in the day to WWF, right? Because WWF had a very formulaic show. Even when they started Monday Night Raw, it was still very formulaic. It was still very patterned. WCW came along, especially when Bischoff was able to launch Nitro. And one of the things that's comical is, people are like, oh, you and Bischoff must hate each other. And, you said all these bad things about him in your book. And it's like, well, if you actually read the book, I actually said a lot of really nice things about him too, because he reinvented the business. I mean, he took a business that was incredibly stale. And this is a kind of fun one. And it ties in. He took a business that was very, very stale, and he reinvented it. He made the shows live on Monday nights. He, put on big name matches. He reinvented the business. And I had met, of all people, Matt Jackson of the Young Bucks. This was the day I was going to debate Bischoff, actually. And Matt and I were just in a hotel lobby, and I said, hey, you're Matt Jackson. He's like, yeah. I said, RD Reynolds. Oh, yeah, Wrestle Crap guy. Yeah, great. And I said, it's really cool what you guys are doing, because this was before AEW officially launched, right?
Yeah, because this was the first StarCast before All In, correct?
Correct. This was All In weekend. And I told them, I said, that's really cool what you guys are doing. I said, you're going out and you're trying to reinvent the business. It's a business that's incredibly stale, because WWE is by far number one, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But you're reinventing the business. You're giving these people an alternative. I said, this is really cool what you guys are attempting to do. And I said, I think you're going to be a success. And I never forget it, because he just looked me in the eyes and he just says, I really hope so. And he had kind of a look of like, I don't know that it's going to be a success. And I was like, just stay true to it. I just think it's going to be a success. They're really weird that I would have that conversation with one of the Bucks, the day that I debated Bischoff. But I mean, there are a lot of similarities. I mean, you're again, it's this business that a lot of people are just like, can we please have something different? Can you please give us something different? WWE, obviously, they have their business model. This is what we're going to do. It's kind of like, of all things, you ever play Madden? You ever play football games?
Yeah.
And so Madden is like always exactly the same. And one of the cool things is, and I play it every single day. In the this would have been early 2000s, 2004. There was another football game called ESPN NFL 2K. And so they had 2K2, 2K3. To this day, I still play NFL 2K5 almost daily, because I can be on my exercise bike and I can play that game. But it was an alternative to Madden. And I think that in any business, you really want to have a true alternative. That's what WCW provided. That's what ECW certainly provided back in its day. That's what AEW provides today. So,
and that's why they go, and that's why everybody looks at AEW like, you guys are WCW 2.0.
Hell, we've said
like,
right.
I'm like, okay, you probably call it WCW 2.0 because they're bringing in all the old guys that WWE replaces, but they're still giving off a better product than what WWE is giving.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there might be sometimes that the matches are but like, okay, I'm going to use SummerSlam as an example, because I watched SummerSlam. I watched the whole pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
There was only one good match in that whole show. One good match. And I'm going to use that match later on in the show and later on in our episode for our little segment that we do on here. I co-host those while I'm talking about. But like,
thank God it's your turn.
Yeah. But anyways, WWE obviously gives off the same product because they have the same business model of you have to do a match in 5 minutes and like roughly 5 to 7 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's including entrances. You got to hurry up, get out there, do your beginning, do your middle, and do your ending like that.
Well, how many times? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Which with AEW, you get a little leeway on that, but they still, at the beginning, they were going way too long. And I'm sure they understood that they went way too long on their matches. But now they got to the point where, like, okay, now we got to do this to make an example, especially when we got to get storyline-wise going and everything else. I find AEW superior to WWE by a long shot. Maybe that's what the WCW market me. I don't know.
Well, but how many times we've talked, even on our podcast, every time we do one, how many times have one of us said something to the effect of, yeah, I was watching Raw, fast forwarded through like half of it, didn't even watch SmackDown because as I'm fast forwarding, I can see kind of what's going on. Don't care, this is dumb. Baron Corbin's not really poor. Like, whatever. It's very rare. First of all, I usually am able to watch AEW live, so I can't fast forward, but I watch AEW live because I know it's probably going to be really good, something that I enjoy.
Right, and I even said this and everything too, because, you know, we're going to get onto the subject that we're talking about for tonight, is the death of WCW. When WCW died on March 26, 2001, wrestling died. And I'm sure, no, hold on. Wrestling died only because there was only one company to watch, and that was WWE. Okay. Now, all these years later, you got alternatives like Impact, like Ring of Honor, like New Japan, like AEW to watch. That way, you're not getting staled just by one company of watching the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, you have to have. Didn't TNA launch in 2002? Yeah,
just like Ring of Honor. Yeah, just like Ring of Honor did, but it was still an alternative.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So I would disagree that wrestling died. I think mainstream televised wrestling, I wouldn't even say it died because there was a lot of good stuff that happened in the Ruthless Aggression era. It's just at the time it kept being compared to the Attitude Era and to WCW.
Okay, well, the Ruthless Aggression era was until 2002, but that Invasion storyline, oh, God, it was god-awful.
We could do 6 years on the Invasion storyline because it was not good, and I've heard every excuse in the book. I've heard all the reasons why they couldn't do it the way they couldn't do it, and I think that's all a bunch of malarkey. I mean, you're given something on a silver platter. You either can capitalize on it. I mean, I think I'll go back to the Punk, debut in AEW. If I get the feeling if they were booking, if that was booked by, especially Invasion era WWE, could you imagine what they'd have done? With CM Punk showing up, sometimes it's the simplest things. You just put Punk out there in Chicago. You let him just go out. You let him go and make a huge difference. You just let him go out and talk. The same thing, I view it the same with what they did with the Invasion. You tried to muddy the waters. You just have the WCW guys. All they had to do was go and look at the NWO. Now, the early days of the NWO, because you didn't want to do where there was no payoff, which was one of the major problems that caused WCW to go downhill. But the early days of the NWO, they came in and they just beat up people, and then people were like, "Oh my gosh, this is a real invading force." If WCW would have come into WWE, and done the exact same thing, it would have been, probably bigger than the NWO, but they just didn't. They wouldn't allow that to happen.
Well, but right, but go ahead, Jake.
Oh, I was just gonna say we did get one good thing from that Invasion storyline, though. We got that awesome promo that Paulie ripped Vince McMahon a new one.
Oh, I'm not here to say that there weren't things that were good during that time. It's a blanket statement to say everything during that time frame was terrible. That is not true. To this day, I will never forget Rob Van Dam getting more and more over, just seemingly by the week. Oh, you can't do it like that. It's like,
oh, well, it wasn't on me, but actually I was going to reach, because as I mentioned, I fell in love with wrestling in 2006 the first go around, and it was because of that. It was because of this dude.
Yeah. So Rob Van Dam, he was awesome. And one of the cool things was you saw him getting more and more and more over. This is one I will never forget. Is there was a show, and I don't remember when it was, but Austin was like getting kind of fed up with, he was ranting and raving, and he says something like, "I'm gonna just beat up whoever the next person that comes through that door is."
I remember this.
In comes Rob Van. We all remember this, right? Because Rob Van Dam walks in, and the crowd goes insane, and Austin's like, "Oh, hey, how you doing?" And Austin as a heel it was terrible for business, but he was amazingly entertaining. But the problem was, we all remember when Rob Van Dam walked through that door. You have all this momentum with this guy. Who can tell me what happened the next week on Raw?
Got squashed. Not squashed, but he...
But the thing is, none of us can. Why? You had the perfect setup. That should have been, Rob Van Dam, he's super hot. These people really want it. Put him versus Austin at the next pay-per-view. None of us can even tell. Did that happen? Did that not happen? No one knows. And why? Why would you not capitalize on that?
Actually, but that's the thing, though, is he actually did get that big momentum because he did get booked for the title.
But he didn't get the title until it was a while later.
It was a few years later, but that's what I'm saying. Like, they used that, Foley used that momentum of like how hot he was and put him in a triple threat with Austin and Angle for the belt. But yeah, it's like, okay. And then he goes, does the thing in Survivor Series, and he goes to a bigger thing with The Undertaker. And then RD goes down.
Yeah, I am not a big fan of multi-man matches anyway. If you have somebody that's that you can see, this guy is really gaining momentum, you put the rocket on the guy and you do something with him. Just my opinion.
Right, but at the end of that match, you knew it had come down to Austin and Rock. It's a given. It's a given. But getting back to the topic at hand here.
Yeah, I've got a question for the author, though. So what did kill WCW? Because that's what everybody wants to know.
I mean, that's spoiler alert. It's can you hold up the picture again? The cover of the book.
You mean Eric Bischoff's favorite?
Yeah, that was, as I said, that was really mean of me because I picked out all the photos on that cover. So, and that picture of him from the cover, I remember he was talking to like Conan or somebody.
Yeah,
and it was a very small. It was a very small. I mean, it was like small, and I was just like, oh man, that picture of Bischoff, he looks like the world's biggest scumbag. But anyway, the reason I said show the cover of the book is not so we can shield the book, but what you see on the cover of that book.
So we got to promote the book. We'll promote the book.
On the cover of the book is Russo, it's Hogan, it's Hall and Nash, and it is Bischoff. But the thing is, all of those people on the cover, they played a hand in it, but they're not who killed WCW. WCW, even at the end, had good ratings. They were losing money hand over fist. But, I really think that could have been corrected. That wasn't what killed WCW. What killed WCW is somebody walked in, a new guy at Turner Broadcasting, and just said, yeah, I don't want wrestling on the network anymore. That's what killed WCW. Everybody can say, oh, it was this, it was that, it was whatever. But to be honest, if somebody came in, if a network executive came in and said, somebody new at USA came along, or at Fox, and said, I don't want wrestling on the network anymore. I mean, they could very badly wound WWE. WCW was in an interesting position because they had lost so much money and they had turned so many fans against them. I mean, the one that was a fascinating story to me was they had run a Hogan Flair match. I think it was in 98, end of 98 maybe. And then they ran it again in 99. I may have my timing off. I apologize for that. But, excuse me, if that is the, excuse me, they ran that match. It was less than a year. It was a year apart. Same match. And they had lost over 90% of their paying audience. The pay-per-view, the people that are paying on pay-per-view, 90% of them walked away. That's a staggering. It reminds me of there was a Simpsons episode where Krusty is talking about how he wants to, I'm going to spit in every fifth Krusty Burger, to try, threatening people to not to drive them away. And it was saying, I don't think that if Ronald McDonald came out and said, I'm going to spit in every third burger, I don't think that many people would run away from McDonald's. I mean, it was just amazing. It was, the death of WCW. I mean, it was really interesting because, and it's just a fascinating story as to how you can just alienate a fan base. I mean, and again, in that instance, what did the fans of WCW have? They had an alternative, right? They had a hot alternative that their fans could say, I don't need to watch WCW anymore. It insults my intelligence. I'm going to go watch WWF. And I think we may be seeing some of the same. Again, WWE is not going to go out of business. I want to make this abundantly clear. But I think you could see you're seeing it already. I think you're seeing a groundswelling of support where it's like, okay, I'm going to go check out this other alternative. They don't treat me like a moron. So
it's also very different though, because nowadays, I would go so far as to say that if the Monday Night Wars had taken place when TiVo and DVR had been invented, it would have gone a completely different way. Mm-hmm. Because now you have the option to record it. Like, for example, AEW is the only wrestling program that I watch live now, and I do it when I can because we're busy. We got shit to do. Everything else I stream, and it's so convenient. And then plus, like when Raw sucks, I just skip the parts that don't interest me, or maybe I'll get hooked. And I want to be fair. I give it a fair shot at the beginning, but when you start out every show with a 20-minute promo that we see at the start of every single Monday Night Raw with whoever the champion or whoever went at the Days of the Authority, it's like, oh, it's Stephanie, Triple H, or Stephanie and Triple H rambling for 20 minutes about the same thing. It's like the fast forward button is there, and it's very tempting.
Right. Yeah. I think that you have to be very careful about being so repetitive. I mean, that was actually with AEW. That was something that was a running joke too, is when Sting first showed up. And like every week, it was like, here comes Sting. He's going to talk. He's going to attempt to talk. He's going to get interrupted by Taz and his cronies or whoever else it may be. It became a joke, and you can't become a joke to your fan base.
Well, heck, they were kind of poking fun at Schiavone for a couple weeks, Tony Schiavone, because what was that? Somebody on the broadcast would always be like, "Say it, Tony. It's Sting."
You're right.
Okay,
that is the thing. Like all the commentators now, they have their own sayings.
Yeah.
when it comes to scene, or it comes to certain wrestlers, like I remember back in the day when Brock Lesnar would come out, all of a sudden Taz would be like, "Well, here comes the pain." I'm like, or Sasha Banks, I'm like, "It's boss time." I'm like,
"Oh, I hate it's boss time." That's my kryptonite. I absolutely hate whenever that's said. I mean, it is. There is nothing like, she may be the greatest wrestler in the world, but to be honest, I have not been able to watch her matches in at least a year, because whenever I hear it's boss time, I'm just like, that is the stupidest thing. And when is that something you're like, man, that's cool, I can't wait to see a boss? What? Well, I know I'm an old man and everything, but I mean, come on.
I think when your target demographic is 12 and under, it might hit a little different.
Well, that may be their target demographic, but they're most of their audience is like older than me. So,
yeah, 100%. Which that might be their problem. Which, I mean, I don't even get me started on the WWE commentary team, because people might have their annoyances with the AEW commentary team, but I mean, just the WWE commentary team is just a constant source of eye rolls for me, because it's like, and I'm probably the only person, it seems like I'm the only person on planet Earth that doesn't like Corey Graves on commentary, but he just annoys the living shit out of me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, excuse me, everything, whenever and this is true about a lot of things in WWE, it's not just the commentary. Everything is just so manufactured. It's so homogenized. It's so, this is what, Sasha Banks comes out, we always say it's boss time. This person comes out, we always say exactly this. And it's just the same thing over and over and over and over and over. And like even if the CM Punk thing, it's clobbering time. Like whenever you would read like the Fantastic Four, which is what that's from, it's clobbering time, the thing. But he didn't say it in every single comic book. It was like, oh, okay, this is something he says sometimes. It's not something he says every single time. And if it's something the character says, that's one thing. But whenever it's the commentator, you're just like, this is so repetitive. It's so manufactured. It's so homogenized. That's to me the number one thing with WWE that drives me insane is the commentary. Like, I tell you, if Peacock, I almost said WWE Network, if Peacock offered to have different commentary streams, and one was nothing but, here, you're not going to hear any commentary, it's just going to be the audience, and I guarantee you, I would my view on WWE would change entirely.
Yeah. Well, your other option is to just learn Spanish and listen to the Spanish commentary team, so long as their table doesn't get destroyed.
Right. I can switch over to German. I know that.
So. There you go. Yeah, they're pretty safe. I remember, I forget what event it was, but they took out the Spanish and then the German announce table, and I actually took notice. I was like, oh shit, that never happens.
Right. Yeah.
I think the best commentary team was from WCW.
Well, they're in AEW now, so.
Oh well, no, not all.
Not all. I know, it's a joke.
But who was the best commentary team, by the way?
I would say, well, I'm saying in general, like I would say Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan was like one of the best commentators.
Interesting. Bobby didn't really like working with Tony.
Yes,
I can tell you that.
I knew that, but I'm just saying, like, general, like I always thought that, like, even though he didn't like him, they could still feed off of each other and have to make a show work.
Right. It was funny because Bobby and Tony Schiavone, Bobby worked with the most famous, the person he liked working with the most was Gorilla Monsoon. And we're talking primetime wrestling, arguably my favorite wrestling show ever.
And those two right there are the best commentary team of all time.
Yeah, they were, but it was funny because Bobby was in WCW. Gorilla, of course, was still in WWF. And Gorilla was like, he's just not, he doesn't understand the timing and everything, how Bobby worked. And Gorilla actually offered, to Bobby, he said, "Do you want me to call Tony? I can walk him through how to make this work so that you guys could be better." So if you like them as they were in WCW, they could have been, think about this, they could have been even better, but Bobby said, "No, don't call Tony. It's not worth it." So just a little fun fact there for you.
Well,
yeah, we can't sleep on Paul Heyman either, who gave us such gems as, "Hey, Mom, I came to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to get to see Bush."
I think that Paul and Jim Ross were a fun commentary team.
Really good, really good. But speaking of controversy and AEW, I'd like to get your opinion on the Max Caster debacle.
I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm out of every conceivable desirable target demographic. That was whenever I'll never forget, somebody said, when I turned 50, people were like, "Oh, what do you think about this?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just so depressed. I'm not in that desired demographic anymore. No one's ever going to make anything that I want, what have you." But to me, I try not to get political, and I try not to ever discuss anything like, cancel culture or anything like this. But I often think everyone can make mistakes. Everyone can make mistakes. If you are, I'm a huge Reds fan. Okay. Pete Rose, I was there for 41-92, all this stuff. And Pete Rose is a controversy magnet. No, should he be in the Hall of Fame? Should he not be in the Hall of Fame? Whatever. I think the thing is, and this is where it ties in with Max Caster. If you make a mistake, you say something you shouldn't have, and you immediately realize, I made this mistake, I'm going to come out, I'm going to be in earnest, and I am going to say, I'm sorry, I'm going to apologize for this. I'm going to try and work to get better at it. In many ways, and this will sound crazy, but I've always found, at least in America, can be a very forgiving country. And I think if you come out and say, "Look, I made a mistake with this, I'm very sorry about it," I think everybody deserves, everybody deserves the benefit. I mean, it's, and I'm not going to get too deep into this, but as a Christian, I mean, that's one of the things that we're always taught is, even God will forgive you. Even if the worst sins, God will forgive you. And I think that's upon us as well. If someone makes a mistake, they say something they shouldn't have said, and then they come out and say, "You know what? I'm very sorry about this. I will not make this mistake again." I think if you are honest and, just sincere about it, I think people deserve the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, my whole thing with the Max Caster thing was, first of all, I mean, this is just my opinion. I mean, it was pretty edgy for him. I don't really think it was all that bad, especially if you compare it to days gone by. I know it's a different world, but Here's my thing. So it wasn't a live show. Mm-hmm. So you're telling me that, okay, so first of all, either A, he didn't run it by anybody and the company was fine with that, which, I mean, but let's just say for shits and giggles, he did run it by a producer or an agent or someone up the chain, and they said, "Yep, that's fine, go with it." In fact, they probably said, "Oh, that's pretty funny." Even if one or the other happened, it doesn't matter. So they go out, do the show. I think they said there were 7,000 or so fans in it. So at least a few thousand people. Nobody raised any hell when it was recorded. It was then edited and approved by someone and then put on YouTube. And then only after somebody on Twitter got a hold of it and started making a big deal out of it, then they go back and edit it out, and then they give Max Caster the proverbial wrist slap. But the company took very little ownership. I think Tony Khan made, honestly, it was kind of like a bullshit statement. Like, "Hey, I'm sorry that slipped past me. I'm not sure how that happened, but I'm going to be editing Dark from now on," which, whatever. No, you're not. Like, come on. No, you're not. No, you're not. You got caught. It's the same thing that happened to Jim Cornette, albeit same thing though, was what they said is somewhat irrelevant because the content was put out there and only pulled after somebody made a big deal out of it, which means it got the stamp of approval from the company.
Right.
So
I mean, I'm also of the mindset, again, I think it's because of my age. I think it's a generational thing where I think people get offended far too easily about things. But again, that's a what am I a boomer? What is the term?
I think you're a boomer.
I'm probably much older than a boom. I'm older than a boomer probably, but I mean it's something where it's a generational thing. That's why I said I'm probably the wrong person to ask because again I'm not.
I mean, I honestly thought the worst part was the crack about Julia Hart's nether region, and the only reason I thought that was particularly bad is it's like, well, first of all, she's 19, which is kind of, but then at the same time, too, it's like she's brand new and like the epitome of a baby face, both literally and figuratively.
Right.
And it's like, I mean, it didn't do anything. The rest of the rap kind of made sense because he was dissing everybody else. It didn't. That was my thing where I thought he went a little too far. Everything else was topical and on point. And frankly, he said some equally offensive things in the past and nobody raised any hell about it.
Well, I mean, if you go back and watch John Cena whenever he rapped, it was the same thing.
Thank you.
But again, I mean, it's something that was, it was something that was a different time. But I mean, if you were to go back and you watch that, I don't know if they pulled all that stuff from Peacock or whatever they might have. But it's the same thing, right? Again, I think we live in a different society. You have to be cognizant of that. You have to understand that. And, if you said something that offended somebody, the first thing you do is you say, I'm really sorry that I did that. I did not mean to offend you. I apologize for this. I will try and be better about this moving forward. I think that happens with a lot of people. So you just have to be willing to say, this is a mistake I made.
Well, I mean, I said about Max Caster when the Acclaim debuted, I said I thought this gimmick was a very bad idea, A, because it's been done before, and B, if your gimmick is you come out and diss rap, your opponents every time you come out to the ring, eventually you're going to say something that's going to piss somebody off. So it's kind of it's got an expiration date. But to your point, I think one thing they could do, because apparently they're requiring Max Caster to go through sensitivity training, which is fine.
Sure.
I think if they come back as baby faces, and whether or not they kibosh the rapping is kind of irrelevant, but like they could come back as a baby face team and be like, look, maybe we were going about this the wrong way. Maybe we just need to focus on what we do in the ring as characters. I think they could pull a complete babyface turn and get a tag team championship run out of it.
Yeah. I really don't want him to come back as a babyface. Other than the things where he had offended people, I just saw him, and again, this is the old codger here. I was just like, look at this young whippersnapper, and he's wearing the big headphones, and thinks he's funny rapping. I don't like rap anyway. Give me my Duran Duran. It's that kind of thing.
Well, but the only thing I could really say to this that would be, it may or may not be a criticism to AEW, but like I remember early on, it was during Pride Month, they did an interview with the Acclaimed, and I guess Anthony Bowens he's gay. Like it didn't really come up until then. But I'm like, oh, well, I thought they were supposed to be a heel tag team.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of took away some of the heel steam, I think, because again, it wasn't because he was gay. It was because the interview they did was like, oh yeah, like I've gone through athletic diversity and this, that, and the other. It's like these are things that you say about a baby face.
Right.
You don't talk about the hurdles that a heel had to jump over.
Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I have not heard if they're bringing him back. They're not bringing him back or whatever. So
I think
it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think what they kind of did, and this is what I hope happened. I think they pulled him aside and say, "Hey, listen, this kind of blew up. So we need to publicly give you some kind of punishment. We're going to send you to the sensitivity training because A, they're probably going to verify that, and B, it can't hurt, right?
Right.
but we just need to keep you off TV for a little bit for this to blow over, and then we can bring you back. And I would just hate for him. I would just hate for him to lose out on his wrestling career because of something that I would argue wasn't his fault.
Correct. Yeah. Agreed.
Cool. Now, the other question I wanted to make sure we covered tonight was, obviously, you can read more about the death of WCW by buying this book and reading it. It is very good. I'm not just saying that because he's on here. It's a very, very good book. I enjoyed it immensely, and it has pictures. But do you see any parallels with what WCW was doing back in the day that arguably led to its downfall and what AEW is doing now?
I think what I saw from AEW and WCW, I see it more of this is what got WCW interest. And that is WCW, whenever it first came out, or when Nitro first hit, you got to see a lot of different stuff. You didn't see the same things. And so, on any given Nitro, you would get a cruiserweight match. You would get, a big Hoss match, the Barbarian and Ming or whatever. You would get high flying action. You would get all this different stuff. I don't see it so much that I think because they're on the ascent. I mean, right now it's going up, 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 up. And I don't really know that I see any parallels to WCW's downfall, but I think there are things they need to be very careful about. They need to be careful about how many former WWE guys they bring in. I mean, they have been able to do something that is pretty incredible, which is they have been able to create new stars. I mean, really big stars. You're talking Darby Allin, you're talking Jungle Boy. I know the Young Bucks were they were known, to hardcore wrestling fans, but now you get to see them, and to a large audience, this is their first exposure ever to the Bucks. Hangman Page, all these other different characters that you're just like, wow, this character is really interesting. I really like what they're doing. I want to see more of them. The key is don't let you need to utilize that talent. Don't let you can bring in big names. Bringing in Punk is great. Bringing in Bryan Danielson, great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but make sure that you are not cannibalizing the other guy's time. Whenever you bring different people in, I mean, they have so much talent on that roster right now. I mean, one of my favorites is a young girl. Her name's Ty Conte, and I just think she's just awesome. And I have not seen her on TV in a couple months.
Although I think she's got a match this week. I believe she does.
On Dynamite or Rampage or something.
Actually, you know what?
Because don't tell me on Dark. I mean, that doesn't count.
I can't remember. I can't remember if it's Dynamite or Dark Elevation. I can't remember.
Yeah, but I mean, she's not going to get. She needs to be. I mean, it was something where, and you see this. They kind of cycle people in and out because their roster is so huge. Like for a while, it was a running joke when I on every Wednesday night on my Facebook, facebook.com/WrestleCrapRD. I do a running commentary, with whoever wants to hop on there with me. And it was a running joke for a long time on Dynamite. It was like, okay, Dynamite's opening, here's Jurassic Express. You would just see Jurassic Express like every single week at the exact same time. And then they just vanished. And you didn't see them for 6 weeks, 2 months. And you're like, are these guys still employed?
I think I think that was their run on Dark and Dark Elevation.
Right. I mean, it's a testament to AEW that they have a abundance of riches, as we would say. But it's also something that if you're going to bring in these other people and you're going to bring in CM Punk, again, I am not saying don't bring in CM Punk. I am not saying that at all. You need to get more eyes on the product. but you run the very real risk of, okay, I'm going to bring in CM Punk, this week on Dynamite. If you give him 20 minutes, a half hour, whatever you should give him, and I'm not arguing it at all. You need to do that. You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful because you don't want that momentum that these young people, these young stars, and they're your stars. You're talking, Jungle Boy, MJF, is so many different people. You have this talent. Make sure you don't stall that talent. Make sure you keep building that talent. And it's a juggling act. It's a real juggling act.
Yeah, I mean, Ben and I have talked more than pretty much every week about how that's the one thing we're afraid AEW will do, and they haven't done it yet, but there are seeds of that, how that could potentially happen. And again, like you said, every time they bring in a former WWE guy who was on top, like you've got CM Punk already there. Everybody's pretty sure that Bryan Danielson's coming. There are rumors that they're going to be signing Bray Wyatt.
Mm-hmm.
And with every big new signee, there's a peak in interest, but then for every new top guy they bring in, there's somebody on the undercard that's not going to get that push up.
Yeah, I think it's almost something you have to, and maybe they're doing this with Danielson. I don't know because he hasn't shown up yet. I almost think you kind of have to do the same thing that we were talking about. They cycled Jungle Boy out. They're cycling Ty out. They're cycling whoever out. I almost think you have to do that when you're bringing in big name talent as well. I know it would be great to bring in Punk, and then the next week you bring in Bryan Danielson, and then the next week you bring in Adam Cole, and the next week you bring in Bray Wyatt, whatever. But I think it's something, I think you're going to get more bang for your buck, so to speak, no pun intended, is
if you use the phrase, not the finisher.
Correct. If you bring those people in, okay, and you let Punk have the spotlight completely, that what that time is, let him have that spotlight. Don't bring in Danielson yet. Bring in Danielson in November or something. once the Punk starts to wear out, and okay, you're starting to lose. You've hit that rating spike, and it's starting to drop because he's on every week. Now you bring in Danielson and you spike it again. And you don't, I know, trust me, as a fan, I want to see Bryan Danielson like this week. I really do. But I think from a business perspective, in a don't copy what happened to WCW perspective, I think it would be better to ration those debuts out.
We talked about this on our last episode where it was dedicated to Punk and Danielson. And my suggestion was, which again, take this with a grain of salt because I'm by no means an expert, but my suggestion was if you have to bring in Danielson right now for the name value, you would, at least if I were booking it, I would make him kind of like the journeyman ambassador, because one of the things he said he wanted to do was to travel around the world and wrestle all over again. So I would somehow, some way get him involved with New Japan and AAA. Yes. And he'd appear on AEW programming, but sparingly. Like, I thought you could get him involved with Tanahashi in a feud for the IWGP US title. And that'd be a great way to bring him in, but not take away the Punk steam. And then Ben was going to say something, and I cut him off like an asshole. So,
no, you're fine. Man, it's just because there is the talks of reason why, because they're going to New York in a few weeks.
Yep.
AEW is, and there's talks that the reason why the New York show is already sold out more than WWE is there's talks that Bryan Danielson is going to debut there.
Yeah.
Now, if he does debut there, that's a different story. But then again, just, wait to see what happens. And the thing with Bray Wyatt, everybody was saying that Bray Wyatt was there at Rampage.
He was in the crowd.
So that was really? So that was him.
Yeah, that was him. He was in the crowd.
Okay, so then that was him also at the signing, going up to Darby Allin.
That I don't know.
Well,
I only saw the photo. I only saw the photo of him in the crowd.
Okay, well, the same guy wearing the same stuff and everything, going up to meet and greet with Darby Allin, and Adam Cole, his contract's technically already expired.
Yeah, I know
But
he signed. I know he signed an extension to go through Takeover, I believe. But
which is now officially over.
Yeah, they're saying that his the latest I saw is that his contract actually Adam Cole's contract actually expires this Friday. So that is we'll see. I don't know, and it's again, is that something where you bring in Adam Cole, you know he's going to get a gigantic reaction from the AEW hardcores, but is it something that you bring him in, or do you wait, ration it out? Why do you want to? You don't need to have everybody in there at once.
They're going to have some explaining to do if they bring Adam Cole in, because technically in AEW land he's dead.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting resurrection. And the thing of it is the Bucks are so good and so creative. Like they're not going to just bring him in. They're going to have to, because I will say being the Elite is surprisingly good for what it is.
Yeah.
If Adam Cole does come in, he has to be in the Elite.
He has to what?
Because they killed him. Which technically doesn't he have to feud with Hangman? Because didn't Hangman kill him?
I mean, Hangman's gone right now, and Hangman's a baby, so he can go straight for the Bucks and Kenny.
Yeah, but I mean, everybody's going straight for the Bucks and Kenny who comes in, except Punk. Punk doesn't. That's going to be the tricky thing, because Punk really doesn't need a championship.
Right. And I've already read reports that a lot of people are mad that since Punk came in, they're like, why isn't Punk going for the belt? Why is he going for it, and why and not Christian? Christian doesn't deserve it. I'm like, okay, Christian, might be older and everything, but it's already been established going into the thing that Christian was going for the belt.
Yeah,
and Darby Allin already made it abundantly clear that he wanted the best in the world in Chicago.
But here's the good thing they did with Punk is he came in and his entire promo was about how he wanted to come back and he was happy to be back in pro wrestling. He didn't bring up a title belt.
Right. That's right, and I agree with that as well. But a lot of the fans are like, no, he should just go straight for the title. No.
Patience.
Yeah, well, as RD and I were discussing off air right before you joined, I said something to the effect of that, wrestling fans are passionate and everybody's got an opinion, but sometimes those opinions are wrong.
All right. Well, here's my opinion I want to get on WCW. Because like I said, I'm the big WCW mark. What are some good things that you think WCW did good? And then I want your things that they did bad on.
Well, the big thing is, and I mentioned this, is they provided an alternative. They changed the industry. I mean, they did. They with Nitro, it changed everything. It took a very stale industry, changed it. They gave you a smorgasbord. You would have never seen, luchadors in. I shouldn't say this. You would have seen if they had done true luchadors in WWE, WWF at the time. It would have wound up whenever they brought in the juniors division in WWE. This would have been 2002, 2000, I don't know, early 2000s. And they treated them like these grown men who were, vertically challenged, we'll say. And they treated them like they were all children. And it was like, no, this isn't what this is. It's a different style of wrestling. But I think the luchadors would have done the exact same. It would have been the same thing. They would have never done that in WWF because it's not what Vince understands. Vince would be like, what on earth is this? This doesn't make any sense. So it gave everybody an alternative. And I think that was great. Something else WCW did that was great. I still think the build-up, not the execution, the build-up to Hogan versus Sting at Starrcade is the greatest build I may have ever seen in my life. In fact, I will say it was the greatest wrestling build. I got to think about that. It was one of the greatest wrestling builds I had ever seen in my life simply because they were patient and they waited. And what have we talked about so much on this show? Be patient. Patience. You know, I, to this day, think Eric Bischoff's greatest, the thing I can say best that he did is he was patient. He could have, especially when the war was, you know, the ratings were getting tight, whatever, he could have said, I'm going to go ahead and put this, you know, we're going to bump up Hogan and Sting. He didn't do that. He was patient. It paid off. It was the biggest buy rate ever. I think it was tremendous. I can go on and on and on about the great things WCW did. The terrible things WCW did, and I said this before, is the way they handled their talent. They would just have talent that just like, yeah, I'm not going to go to work anymore. What? What? How would you even do that? You have to be able to handle your employees in a better manner in which they did. That was a major problem. The way they just, you know, would hot shot things. And I mean, as far as things that I wish they wouldn't have done, pretty much anything in the year 2000. No offense to my good friend Vince Russo, but I'll no arms with telling him, you know, that as well, you know, that, hey, you know, what you guys did in 2000 was kind of a disaster. You know,
you told him about that.
Who, Russo?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'll call him up right now and tell him again if you want. I literally just got off. It's funny, right before I got off whenever I had messaged you guys, said, hey, I'm going to be a little late. That's because he and I were working on, he and I do actually 2 shows together now, which is kind of weird to think that, you know, the guy that, you know,
that surprised me when I found out about that. I was like, wow. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, feel free to call Russo in the middle of our live broadcast.
No, but with Russo, the thing is, he and I obviously see wrestling very differently. Okay? There's no two ways about it. But it's also something that I have talked with the guy, I've met the guy, and he is actually a super duper nice guy. I mean, he was. It's so funny because one of the first interviews that he and I did together, he just kept trying to bait me into a fight. You know, what do you have to say about this? You know, who wrote this in this book? And I was like, I don't know, it's me. Probably is. Either me or Brian. We wrote the book together. I don't remember exactly which every single sentence. I wrote this sentence or Brian wrote that sentence or whatever. But you know, he was trying to bait me into a fight. And he would get angrier and angrier, and I would just like start laughing. And he would tell you to this day, like one of his. If he could go and find that interview that he did with me, where he kept trying to bait me and I just wouldn't buy it, and he was getting angrier and angrier and angrier because he thought I was just laughing at him. He would tell you he wishes he could get that interview and destroy it because he was so embarrassed looking back on it. Russo is a nice guy. I don't agree at all with most of how he has booked a lot of professional wrestling, but he's done a lot of good stuff too. But that doesn't mean just because we don't agree on professional wrestling doesn't mean he's an idiot or he is a bad person or anything like that at all. He's not. He's just super nice guy. Whenever just to give you a little peek behind the curtain, when my podcast partner, a guy by the name of Blade Braxton, he and I had done podcasts, Wrestle Crap Radio, before it was never even called a podcast. They didn't even call it a podcast. It was, you know, radio show, whatever that's on the computer. And Blade and I did that for 16 years. And Blade passed away earlier this year. One of the first people to call me was Russo. Hey, I'm really sorry to hear this. I can't even imagine it. What happened? You know, he was a super nice guy. And I'm not saying, nobody else called me. I was flooded with people that I did not expect to hear from. But Russo was one of the first people to call and say, I'm really sorry. You know, please call me when you can. Let's talk. Are you okay? You know, that doesn't take so I look at that and I'm like, this is a guy, and he's very funny if you talk with him. Russo's a very funny guy. He writes some terrible wrestling, and he's done some really horrible wrestling. There's been things that I just sit there and go, dude, what on earth were you thinking? And, a lot of times he'll go, yeah, I don't know. I thought it would be funny. I was like, well, you thought wrong. But that doesn't mean that he's an idiot. It just means that the way he, writes professional wrestling and what I want to see in professional wrestling are two different things. It's okay.
No, and to be absolutely fair, he was paid to be different from the competition.
Right.
Which means you have to make it up.
Yeah, you have to do something different, and you try different things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So,
well, as the old adage goes, when you do great, nobody cares, but when you screw up, everybody, grabs a torch and a pitchfork.
Yep, exactly.
See, and I'm not going to disagree that the year 2000 wasn't the best year, because it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not going to lie that when they tried to reinvent WCW, when they stripped everybody of the titles, this is right before Spring Stampede.
Yep.
They stripped everybody of the belts, and they did the whole New Blood versus Millionaires Club thing.
Yeah.
I actually like that.
Yeah. It was a great first chapter. The problem is the rest of the story wasn't very good.
Well, you're right. I'm not going to disagree with that either, because they took people that was supposed to be part of the Millionaires Club and put them in the New Blood. I'm like, no.
Right.
No. That doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And then, you get to, okay. My thing is Hogan is, I'm not going to get heat for this, probably from you too. Hogan is one of my favorite wrestlers of all time.
It's fine. It's a lot of people's favorite wrestlers.
Right. Well, a lot of people are like, I just like him because he's so politic and everything. If that man was so, and I'm like, okay, I get it. But if that man was so politic to the degree, would he have put Kidman over at Slamboree of that year? No, he wouldn't have. But he put him over.
Well, there's putting someone over and there's putting someone over. But
right, but I'm just saying, like, you got somebody who's the legend of Hulk Hogan, who's the biggest name in wrestling, with Kidman. Now, he could have said, no, I'm not putting Kidman over and whatnot, yada, yada. But he didn't. My biggest thing that here, I know I'll never get to ask this or whatnot. I know there's totally different sides of all this. My biggest thing of that year was Bash at the Beach.
Sure, of course.
I really want to know from everybody's perspectives and everything what behind that story is.
It's in the book.
I was gonna say, if memory serves, Hogan agreed.
You could start reading that. You can just read the chapter to him as a bedtime story.
There you go. I probably forgot. But if memory serves, I believe Hogan used that instance of letting Billy Kidman win that match in order to get something else he wanted later on down the road. Or am I getting that mixed up?
Well, Kidman beat Hogan at Slamboree, and then the next month they went it again. And it was, I believe, if Hogan lost, he was out of WCW. And if he won, he got a shot at Bash at the Beach for the world title from whoever won between Flair and Jeff Jarrett at the Great American Bash. Well, then go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, like I said, it's all in the book. And in fact, the book that you held up, that's the older version of the book. There's a newer version of the book that is 40% larger. It goes into great details about the different items that we're discussing. I mean, it tells you everything that went on.
Okay.
Especially the lawsuit and everything else with that followed Bash at the Beach. That was a very interesting story. So.
Okay. Well. Oh, okay. Well, that part I did not know. It was awesome.
Oh yeah. Yes. There absolutely was.
All right. Alrighty, RD. Well, we are reaching. Well, we're a little past 9:30, so we're going to wrap this up. But want to give you a chance to plug all of your stuff, and once again reiterate the Death of WCW. You can purchase this pretty much wherever books are sold. I got mine on Amazon, and as you have just learned, there's a newer version that is 40% bigger.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't even remember. I think the new version is like, I don't even remember. It's almost 500 pages or something. It's ridiculous. Excuse me. It's the 10th anniversary edition. I think that one's like a little 300 something.
334 if you count the epilogue.
Yeah. The other one I want to say is almost 500 pages. So it's the 10th anniversary edition of that book. I can heartily recommend, especially for the topics we're talking about today. As for me, WrestleCrap.com, 21 years this year. We have been covering the very worst of professional wrestling. It's a comedy site, and we just bring up silly things that we saw in wrestling, and it's not something where we bury performers generally. I mean, it's something where we look at it and say, okay, this is what the ridiculous things we saw in wrestling, and just go into great detail about that. And as I had mentioned, I actually now have 2 shows I do with Vince Russo. One is called RD versus Russo. We literally just recorded it right before I recorded this with you guys, our first episode. And it is RD on one side, Russo on the other. And whatever people want us to debate, you just toss it to us. And then we just go back and forth about it. We went on everything. We had some wrestling stuff this week. We wound up arguing the merits. The main event, this will sound bizarre, is the merits of which movie is better, The Jungle Book or Sleeping Beauty. So that's kind of give you an idea. The other show that he and I do, and I absolutely love doing it, is called The Joker's Mustache. And that is an episode by episode look at every single show from the 1960s Batman television show. And so we go through it. We're 5 episodes in, and it is just an absolute blast. I mean, you've heard people doing podcasts where they go through every step of a wrestling show. That's what he and I do on 1960s Batman episode by episode. So
okay.
That is awesome. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. Your time is valuable, and we thank you for spending a little bit with us. I want to remind everybody, too, we've got a link to WrestleCrap.com down below in the description, along with all of our other stuff, your official merchandise store, which, Ben, say something, model that off for the people.
Yes, Down the Middle Podcast. You can get that in men's shirts. You can get that in women's shirts. And get that in hoodies as well.
Premium hoodies. Also linked to our audio streaming platforms. It's all down below. Feel free to click on it. And as always, like, share, subscribe, tell people about the channel. It's the only way we're going to grow. RD, man, thank you again for being on. It was a blast.
Hey, I appreciate you guys having me on. Thanks so much.
Literally any time. And like I said, if you want to call Russo on air, I'm not going to stop you.
I mean,
it's probably Papaw's bedtime.
So. Yeah, I was going to say, probably not now, but like I'd hope we'd have you on again at some point. So
would love to be on. Thanks.
Awesome. Great. Well, we will wrap it up here. Good night, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. And like always, catch us again. Our normal time is every other Sunday. So this takes the place of this coming Sunday. So the next show will be 2 weeks from this Sunday.
Yes.
All right. I had to think about that for a second. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
And we're off.